O God of faithful surprises, throughout the ages you have made known your love and powerful in unexpected ways. May we daily perceive the joy and wonder of your abiding presence as we choose to offer our lives in gratitude for our redemption. Amen. Amen. Please be seated. Last Sunday during the Mystery Box, Diana talked about the importance of struggling with all the readings in the Bible, not just picking and choosing the ones we wanted to deal with. Some of our lessons for today are ones that might be easier to ignore. But when we choose to wrestle with them, we discover their truth and strengthen our faith. Fortunately for us, we can read the Abraham and Isaac story with 20/20 hindsight, knowing the outcome, sort of like watching a rerun on TV. Even so, can you imagine the emotional and intellectual confusion Abraham was experiencing as he walked the child that he and Sarah never thought they were going to have up the mountain? Who was this God that was asking him to sacrifice his only beloved son? Was this the same God who had promised him that he could have more descendants than could be counted? Perhaps this story in the Old Testament is foreshadowing God's sacrifice of his only beloved son for our redemption. It surely reinforces the hard words of Jesus that we heard in last week's gospel. Whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. But despite all his emotional fears, despite his intellectual doubts, Abraham chose to trust God to keep his promise. In the psalm that we prayed together, 4 times the writer asked God, "How long?" The author feels forgotten and neglected. God seems to have hidden his face from this person who is in very dire straits. Instead of giving up on his relationship with God, this psalmist chooses to trust God, even being joyful in his saving help and singing God's praises. In Romans, Paul discusses the choice of living as a slave of sin or a slave of righteousness. Make no mistake, our choice is not whether or not we want to be a slave. Our only choice is who or what we're going to be a slave to, for we all are a slave to someone or something. As Mark explained in one of his sermons, a slave is much different than a servant. A slave is unpaid and committed to do his or her master's bidding at all times, where a servant is paid and only committed for a contracted period of time. To discover the difference between a slave of sin and a slave of righteousness, let's define sin and its effect on us. Please turn to the bottom of page 848 in our Book of Common Prayer. This is part of our Articles of Faith, page 848. I will read the first 2 questions and we will give the answers together. What is sin?
Sin is the seeking of our own will instead of the will of God, thus distorting our relationship with God, with other people, and with all creation.
How does sin have power over us?
Sin has power over us because we lose our liberty when our relationship with God is distorted.
Sin damages our relationship with God, our neighbors, and all creation. Edward S. Johnson Jr. explains sinful desires do not simply need to be curbed or controlled to make things better. They need to be eliminated, crucified, put to death. As St. Paul states, the wages of sin is death. A person becomes a slave of righteousness through choosing to accept the free gift of God's grace as expressed in the life, death, and resurrection of his only beloved Son, Jesus Christ. Such a person chooses to place his or her faith and trust in God at all times, in all situations. He or she strives to have a right relationship with God, fellow human beings, and creation. Being a slave of righteousness is who we are created to be, and is exactly what being a member of a total ministry church is all about. We show our love of God in all that we do. St. Paul goes even further by discussing the choice of slave that the slave of righteousness has, of trying to continue to live under the law or to live under grace. According to one commentator, living under the law skews our relationship with God by relegating him to primarily being a lawgiver, and us as essentially being law keepers. When we try to continue to direct our lives under the burden of the law, we can become religious overachievers who are never able to please God or ourselves. Righteousness is not something that can be earned or that we need to achieve before we can be acceptable to God. This commentator further explains the difference by stating that living under grace portrays God not so much as one who legislates, but as one who makes promises and bestows gifts. What are some of God's amazing and life-giving promises? Here are just a few. God has promised not to leave us or forsake us. He has promised to be with us always, even until the end of time. God has promised to provide all that we need, such as food, clothing, shelter, and love. He does not promise, however, to give us all we want. God has promised that all things will work together for our good if we love and serve him faithfully. As one internet source adds, it may be difficult for us to see and understand how this is accomplished at times, but God has promised it, and he will deliver it. God has promised us victory over death through the resurrection of Jesus Christ and life everlasting. What a difference it would make in our lives if we choose to live under grace rather than under the law. As the old hymn states, we would live confidently standing on the promises of God, upheld by his love, instead of being bent over under the unbearable weight of the law. St. Paul urges us to choose to live under grace, to believe in the promises of God, so that we can be free from our sin in order to be free for service to God. In the gospel lesson, Jesus asks us to choose to be hospitable, for when we welcome others, we welcome him. True hospitality, which welcomes strangers as equals, can be as simple as offering a cup of cool water, letting a harried mother in front of us in line at the store, paying for the family behind us at the McDonald's drive-thru, or listening to one of the visitors at our diaper pantry. Holy hospitality is willing to take risks to welcome others who may be considered outcasts, realizing that they will enrich us with their presence and their gifts. This kind of hospitality is so much more than treating someone else the way we want to be treated. It is recognizing them as children of God, as holy people, perhaps even as God's messengers. It is valuing them for who they are, not trying to make them think or act like us. Being hospitable is also a way that we can help God to honor his promise by providing what others need. All four of our readings today are about our ability to choose. God has given us free will to choose to be slaves of sin or slaves of righteousness. May we put away our emotional fears and our intellectual doubts and choose to be slaves of righteousness by standing, standing, standing on the promises of God our Savior, standing, standing. We're standing on the promises of God. May it be so.